Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel, Ontario Law and the Older Person. And this topic is elder, otherwise known as intergenerational mediation. And I've taken a short course on elder mediation, so some of the material I'm going to refer to in this video, it's about commentary that was made during that course, not so much something based on content you can find written somewhere else. The information provided in this video is not legal advice. It is relayed for the purposes of general information. No legal decision should be made based on this material. Any viewer who needs legal advice should contact a lawyer. This is material from a Government of Canada website, and this report is called Dispute Resolution Reference Guide. And sometimes mediation is referred to as alternative dispute resolution. Here's the thing, not all forms of alternative dispute resolution are considered mediation. There's actually a lot more content through this site. I'm focusing just on a few details for mediation in particular. And hey, phone scam warning. There are fraudsters pretending to be from the Department of Justice. Before we start talking about elder mediation, I wanted to give you a definition of like regular mediation so we can look at the differences. So this is from the website. Simply put, mediation is negotiation between disputing parties, assisted by a neutral. While the mediator is not empowered to impose a settlement, the mediator's presence alters the dynamics of the negotiation and often helps shape the final settlement. The Canadian Bar Association defines mediation as the intervention into a dispute or negotiation by an acceptable, impartial, and neutral third party who has no decision-making power to assist disputing parties in voluntarily reaching their own mutually acceptable settlement of issues in dispute. What a mediator does is really, it's about facilitating conversation, making sure one party doesn't always dominate, making sure others who might feel locked out usually are enabled to add their contributions. So it's all about managing communication among the parties. Now, in some mediation, yes, they might propose solutions, but it's not always a part of their role. It pretty much depends on the mediator and the nature of the dispute. Characteristics of a mediation. Mediation is, and right off the top, we have something that could be considered incorrect. So they say it's voluntary. No party is forced to use a mediator, nor are they forced to agree to a particular settlement. Sometimes mediation is imposed on parties. In some areas of litigation, you have to try mediation first. So how effective is mediation going to be when you're not at the table voluntarily? So that's a thing. Non-coercive. The mediator does not decide for the parties, but helps them make their own decision. Assisted negotiation. The mediator's role is to be an impartial third party who helps the parties reach a fair and mutually acceptable settlement. The mediator may provide relationship building and procedural assistance. Moreover, the mediator may also provide substantive options to the parties. Again, it depends on the circumstances. Informal. The proceedings of a mediation are more relaxed and informal than those of a court or an arbitration. There are no prescribed rules of procedure and few rules other than those agreed to by the parties themselves. And the rules part of it, when I was a family law lawyer, there was a certain kind of settlement process that certain family law lawyers agreed to. It is a bit more formal than perhaps other kinds of mediation. So this is really general descriptions. As I said, there could be exceptions depending on the circumstances. Objective of a mediation. Conducted properly, mediation can allow all parties involved to move away from legal concepts such as fault and instead allow for a sharing of people's perceptions and experiences and a determination of each party's actual needs and interests. Such an outcome can often do more to truly resolve the problems or perceived problems which led to the dispute than any formal hearing. Another thing that can happen with mediation is that possibly the parties can come up with solutions that a judge would be flat out disallowed from applying. So there's more flexibility and a broader range of possible solutions. What is the role of the mediator? The role of the mediator varies depending on the personalities of the people involved, mandate given to the mediator by the parties, and the degree of emotions present at the mediation. This results in a spectrum ranging from a mediator who is completely neutral and value free to a mediator who takes a more active role in shaping the eventual outcome. The latter borders on mediator as advisor. Regardless of what techniques are used by the mediator to assist the parties in reaching a solution, the mediator is not empowered to render a decision. So this is not a judge. In various situations, the mediator may attempt to encourage exchanges of information, help the parties understand each other's views. And one big part of a lot of mediation processes involves storytelling. So early in the process, what they want in many circumstances is, okay, this party, tell us your story. We're not going to judge. We're not going to respond. Everyone at the table is going to listen to your story. And then when that person is done, we move on to another party. And it's the same thing. And it's forcing everyone to listen. And sometimes this is the first time the parties have actually listened to each other without jumping in, without trying to defend themselves. And just being heard can be a very powerful part of this process. Okay, let the parties know that their concerns are understood. So there's various ways that mediators might repeat what a party is saying, maybe in different language, to make sure we all know what they really mean. Promote a productive level of emotional expression, lay out the differences in perceptions and interests, identify and narrow issues, help parties realistically evaluate alternatives to settlement, suggest that the parties take breaks when negotiations reach an impasse. So everyone needs to get away from each other, get a cup of coffee, kind of calm down. Encourage flexibility and creativity. Shift the focus from past to future because this is a dispute. The past might be a little, you know, full of conflict. And so sometimes what mediators do is first examine what happened in the past, acknowledge the validity of it, and then said, okay, now we want to plot out a new future so that we can have better relationships in the future. Shift the focus from one of blame to a creative exchange between the parties. Hold caucuses with each disputant if there is a deadlock or a problem. So that means kind of breaking everyone up for a moment, and then the mediator will talk in private to a particular party and see if there's better information that can be acquired that way and then shared. Propose solutions that meet the fundamental interests of all parties. And so here's just some examples that you might think of when you hear about mediation. So family law disputes, such as conflict over custody, support, and divisions of the value of the assets, labor disputes, conflict between unions and employers over benefits for employees, disputes between stakeholders can involve disputes over land, access and use of resources, and then as I've added down there, this form of mediation, sometimes known as alternative dispute mediation, tends to involve conflict between the parties over who gets what. So we're talking about things that are of value and there's a dispute over, how that should split up, or one person should get this and another person should get that. So one thing though to keep in mind is usually mediation involves solving conflict about resources. This is a different report on the Government of Canada website. It's called Exploring the Role of Elder Mediation in the Prevention of Elder Abuse. We won't be talking much about elder abuse in this video. Whenever I talk about abuse, I make it clear and give trigger warnings, so not today. Direct quote, in its most basic description, many people understand elder mediation to be a process in which a professionally trained elder mediator, so I've taken a bunch of different mediation courses and the training for an elder mediator is different, okay, utilizes a mediation process model to address disputes involving an older adult addressing age-related issues. So this is material coming from my memory of the training. In elder/intergenerational mediation, the process doesn't involve parties fighting for resources. It involves seeking agreement about how the various individuals and parties can best support an older person in need of support and/or protection. This changes the dynamic of the process. Again, this is material from my memory of the course. The focus in mediation is how to provide support to the older person and possibly that older person's primary caregiver. An elder mediator may need to remind the parties why they are there, as others in the process may get caught up in their disputes and talk over each other and the older person. In addition, there may be reasons why that older person can't be present, such as capacity issues or feeling overwhelmed. And the person who is giving us the material, the instructor for this course, she brought up a lovely idea. So let's say the older person can't be physically present. One of the things she does is she gets a big photo of that older person and places them on the chair. And so here there is a visual reminder to everyone why they're there. A quote from the paper. Elder mediation typically involves larger numbers of participants, including older people, family members, friends, and others who are willing to give support. Depending on the situation, it is not uncommon to include paid caregivers, hospital staff, nursing home and or community care representatives, physicians, and other professionals. So with regular forms of mediation, everyone who is there, they have something they personally want, that they have some kind of stake involved. With elder mediation, we're not talking about who is entitled to get what. We're talking about how to support this one person. So there are going to be more people there, and we might have professionals who are providing advice about what kind of agreements could be made, whether they're practical, whether they're healthy. Continuing with that paragraph, the initial process of elder mediation can sometimes identify suspicions of elder abuse or neglect that had previously gone unrecognized, unnamed, and difficult, if not impossible, to prove. When this is the case, the mediator's role is to gently assess for the presence and extent of such abuse. It is not uncommon to witness a family member acting surprised when another family member suggests that their verbal aggression is abusive. The older adult and other family members as well often report feeling embarrassed and ashamed to tell anyone about the actual or suspected neglect or abuse. They report feeling hopeful that the behavior might change, or in denial, believing that talking will only make it worse. For the most part, they refrain from even calling it abuse. The level and type of abuse and neglect suspected or alleged will determine whether mediation will even be considered. So sometimes people have taken on ageist attitudes or behaviors, just picking it up through osmosis without actually realizing what they're doing. And that can include language that might seem demeaning. It could mean someone like an adult child taking over decisions when it comes to healthcare, even though their parent has capacity to make those decisions themselves. It could be, that teenager who's constantly raiding his grandma's wallet for money, and they can be shocked when they find out this is actually abusive behavior. So, a thing that needs to be considered is whether this person is like intentionally abusive and has no intention of changing that. Because there are a lot of people who feel that if abuse is even an element, that this is not a healthy way to go, to force maybe this older parent to interact with this abuser when it's flat on the table and everyone can see it. Is the person who's abusing the other willing to admit this is abuse and willing to change their behavior? I went to this website, Elder and Family Mediation Services, because I like the way they address the certain issues that are relevant. It's an American website, and actually some of the language is kind of problematic. But as I said, I like how it describes things. I think it's useful. Mediation is an appropriate means to resolve any conflict where the parties voluntarily participate in the process and are motivated to reach a settlement. Elder mediation helps families to successfully grapple with issues such as caregiving for aging parents, estate disputes, safety and health concerns, and decisions regarding the family home and the best place for parents to live. A core value of elder mediation is the protection of the rights and integrity of seniors. Elder mediators act as neutrals but look to families to consider ways to maximize their seniors' independence whenever possible. Mediation is not appropriate and will not be allowed to continue if the mediator finds that there is coercion, abuse, or neglect. And again, it depends on the mediator. They should evaluate this. What is the nature of the abuse? What is the likelihood that it will be stopped because of this process? Another quote, in cases where the elder has cognitive impairment or other limitations in his or her ability to fully understand and participate in decision making, the mediator will insist that an appropriate advocate for the elder, such as an attorney, a social worker, or a geriatric care manager, be present for all conversations and participate in all decisions which would impact the senior. So, as I said, this was written for America. It's an American website. Don't know if it's the same down there, but in Ontario, that other person would need to have official decision-making power. So, either due to a power of attorney for, let's say, property and personal care that the elder gave them when that elder still had capacity, or someone appointed by a judge to have this role. From the site, disputes among adult siblings. Often, as family members age, family dynamics can become more entrenched and complicated. Conflicts that may have simmered below the surface can boil up and make family conversations very difficult. Siblings dealing with the differences in their own geographic, economic, and family situations often find working together challenging, and they may have spouses who hold strong views of their own. So, again, this is from the course I took. Uh, there's often kind of power dynamics among siblings, right? You might have one person who is always taking over and doing all the talking, and another sibling who always feels shuts out and might be thinking, hey, why am I even here? So, something a mediator would want to do is to make sure the dominant sibling isn't able to actually dominate and the other sibling is given a chance to contribute. We also have issues about who should be a caregiver and who should not be. So maybe we have a person who doesn't have a spouse or children, so they're considered the obvious choice for a caregiver because they don't have family responsibilities, or the child who lives the closest to the parent. So maybe this person lives in Kingston with their parent or close to their parent. Meanwhile, someone else might be living in Australia. And so there might be all these assumptions built up about what these different roles should involve. So that is something that might come up during the mediation and might need to be managed. Now, there might be situations where the siblings can't get along, and then you need to be able to evaluate, well, who's going to actually participate in this process in a healthy way. If there's someone who's only going to use this process to air grievances and kind of attack people and not give a constructive contribution, they might be asked to distance themselves from the process. If they're just going to derail it, they're not helpful. And again, the primary focus is not actually the disputes among the family members so much as how do we work together so we can support our parent or other older person in the family. Another quote, caregiver burnout and inheritance issues are common in families, as are health, financial, and caregiving concerns. As family members seek to equitably share the burdens, I hate that word, and the resources of the family, their individual perceptions of fairness are critical and must be aired and considered in a collaborative setting. Families sometimes decide to include spouses and other influential parties in some or all of these conversations. Now I'm going back to the second government site, which was about elder mediation in particular. Quote, often family members with poor communication skills are surprised at how, with the help of the mediator, they actually learn new ways of talking with each other. Participants in the mediation identify topics they wish to discuss or issues they wish to resolve and work towards reaching agreements that attempt to promote their well-being and quality of life. Ideas for ways of helping are generated as people come together and talk about how they can move forward, supporting each other, often through some very difficult times. And so, one thing with mediation is part of it is teaching people how to communicate, especially how to listen. We're very bad with this culture where no one really wants to listen to each other. We're always trying to jump in with our own ideas. So part of the mediation process, as I mentioned before, is storytelling, letting a person tell their story without interruption, without anyone trying to add to it or divert it or whatever. And that can be a very powerful tool when it comes to communication. So sometimes, you're doing your mediation and you might be settling this issue, but you still might be in situations of conflict after mediation ends. But with this new skill set, people might be able to deal with those conflicts in a healthier way. With regard to abuse and neglect, elder mediation can provide a safe, trusting environment where any suspected abuse can be named and plans can be safely put into place to prevent any future abuse or neglect. Sometimes relationships can be rebuilt, while other relationships can be renewed or established. Issues that might be addressed: health and medical care at home, in the community, in the hospital, continuing care and long term care communities, progressive dementias and other memory impairments, caregiving, financial issues, guardianship issues, housing issues, living arrangements, intergenerational relationship issues, new marriages and step relative issues, religious issues, family business issues. So, just want to throw out there, a lot of families that the parents have run a business with the idea of passing it down to one of their kids or all of their kids. That is a potential minefield for stress and resentment with all these assumptions. And they're finding that not enough people who have a family business have made plans for how that business will be handed down. Just putting that out there. Driving issues, right? With older people losing their driver's licenses and a lot of them resenting it because of the loss of independence. Abuse, safety issues, self neglect, legal issues like estate inheritance, living will, power of attorney, etc., end of life planning and decision making. This is a relatively recent article from 2025, and there you can see all the content, where it comes from, who wrote it, and it's called Addressing Conflicts in Later Life Through Intergenerational Mediation, a scoping review. So for those of you who might not be used to this kind of academic material, what they did is they looked at a bunch of other articles and kind of summarized what the results of those articles are. Here we have a quote within a quote. Mediators are concerned to equalize unstable power relationships by enabling vulnerable old people, problematic language there, to express their feelings and wishes freely in a safe atmosphere. There is a concern to transform any learned helplessness into a healthy resistance to dysfunctional family pressures. And then the end of that quote, learn to helplessness. This is something that I will address in another video which involves older people and their interactions in the healthcare system. But in a lot of situations, older people are almost rewarded when they show a lack of initiative and let someone else do something. We also have an issue where we have this cultural expectation that if someone offers to help, the other person should accept that help, even if they don't need it. And so you have older people who someone will come and say, hey, can I carry those grocery bags for you? And now this older person feels, well, I have to do that, otherwise I'm being mean. So that's just a trend I've seen show up in different areas of life. Okay, moving on. This highlights the goal of balancing power dynamics to create safe spaces where older adults can discuss their needs openly. By addressing these imbalances, mediation reduces feelings of helplessness, empowering older adults to assert their wishes and feel more in control within family interactions. The goal is to support their empowerment within family dynamics. Another quote, I skipped some stuff. 7 articles address the importance of the mediator maintaining neutrality. 70% of family mediators agree that mediators should maintain neutrality throughout the process, refraining from taking sides or aligning with any party involved in the mediation. Further, so Taylor further explored the concept of neutrality through 2 aspects of ethical mediation practice, which the author referred to as strict neutrality and expanded neutrality. And unfortunately, this text doesn't really give us a definition of either of those concepts. Going on, a mediator who used the concept of strict neutrality was more likely to come from a background in law and would expect the participants to negotiate without much intervention. In contrast, a mediator who utilized the idea of expanded neutrality was more likely to have a background in therapy and would actively intervene between family members to help them reach their goal. So, which do you think is a better approach? Now, for me, strict neutrality is a better approach, but I have a background as a lawyer and I've actually taken a number of mediation courses. And what was funny is that the people organizing it would try to make sure that there was no more than one lawyer in any given group. So, for example, there are sometimes group projects or mediation role play. And they did not want all the roles to be lawyers because we all had the same approach to dealing with issues, which was, to take a lot of notes. So, which do you think is a better approach, to just stay out of it aside from managing communication, or to be a kind of guide? And who do you think would make a better mediator? Someone who's got a background as a lawyer or someone who's got a background as a therapist? Barriers to mediation. And while I have indicated here that this information is from England and Wales, we also have the same issues in Canada. So, in England and Wales, there has been encountered various challenges, including the absence of supportive legislative framework and family court system, limited resources and training, low referral rates, and public doubt about the effectiveness of mediation itself. In a more recent article, the older person's mental capacity was seen as one of the biggest challenges in elder mediation, as it affected the older person's ability to fully engage and participate in the mediation process. Fear was another major barrier to mediation services, as older adults may be concerned about jeopardizing their relationship with family members. And I think you can think of a number of examples where an older person has done things like, for example, pay way too much money for adult children and their lifestyles because they're afraid of being punished by not seeing the grandkids or being punished in some other way. Diversity slash cultural competence in mediation. Many papers emphasize the importance of valuing the client's cultural and ethnic background to provide culturally safe and effective mediation. This may involve being aware of specific cultural needs, values, lifestyles, worldviews, and verbal and nonverbal communication cues, as well as the mediator's possible biases and how these can influence practice. It was also identified that these specific cultural differences may affect mediation practice, including the use of intentionality, attitudes toward neutrality, power balancing, and the perception of the mediator as an expert. Additionally, many papers emphasize the need for mediation training to include content on culturally appropriate intervention strategies, as culturally diverse older adults are at higher risk of abuse, and mediation practices often neglect culturally competent methods. Okay, so that's a lot of words there. So, yes, there's a lot of need for greater cultural sensitivity and expertise. I'm totally behind that idea. However, what if the culture includes behaviors that might be considered abusive? What if this particular kind of person is expected to dominate over others? So, what should the mediator be doing? Should they be supporting this kind of dynamic? Or should they step away from that cultural milieu to say, okay, this is how we handle it here? So it's not, to me, a clear cut yes or no concept. I think there's more nuance that needs to be taken into consideration. So do you agree or disagree with what I'm proposing? And it'd be interesting to hear different points of view. When questions of capacity arise, two articles suggested that professionals other than the mediator, such as a geriatrician, should conduct the assessment to reduce bias and ensure the effectiveness of the mediation process. A few articles highlighted that a diagnosis of dementia does not necessarily indicate a lack of capacity, underscoring the distinction between the capacity to participate in mediation and the capacity to enter into a mediation agreement. The ethical implications of intergenerational mediation in relation to capacity are significant due to their impact on an older adult's autonomy, decision making, and participation. So, something I addressed in a different video is a discussion of the fact that capacity should be evaluated according to the actual activity. Someone might have capacity to do one thing, but not another. And of course, something not addressed here is capacity can kind of rise and wane. You might have someone this day who's doesn't have the capacity, but on a different day does. We also have an issue where there's a amount of ageism when it comes to evaluating capacity, which is something I'm going to talk in a different video. But for example, when someone is assessing someone's capacity, let's say they're assessing the capacity of a 25-year-old who accidentally leaves the wrong element on a stove, but then discovers it and turns it off in time to avoid any damage. Well, that's just a moment of forgetfulness. Whereas when it's an older person doing the same thing, it might be interpreted as a form of dementia. So the bias is there. And I think, though, as we go forward and learn more about dementia, hopefully mediators will also become more informed and be alive to these different possibilities. Since capacity is not always clear cut, conducting thorough assessments is crucial to ensure an unbiased determination and to avoid relying on assumptions. Further, two papers emphasized how concerns about the older adult's mental capacity can be used to exclude older adults whose capacity is in question, casting doubt on their suitability and capability for mediation. In response, two papers highlighted that mediators advocate for clear ethical guidelines and training emphasizing these legal distinctions, aiming to provide meaningful support for older adults' decision making. So, first of all, though, when we talk about assessments, we have to talk about cost. Who is going to provide those assessments? Is it something that's going to be covered over under OHIP? I kind of think not. And then we're talking about ethical guidelines versus legal issues. And here's the thing we're aware of is that how law practitioners address things and how they phrase things, the terminology might not properly line up with how healthcare providers determine capacity. So there's been a push for these two groups of people to spend more time together and learn from each other so that there can be a more sensible, cohesive approach to legal issues versus health issues. And as far as I know, that's not happening yet. Power imbalances in relation to intergenerational mediation can be understood as a force applied intentionally to achieve an individual's objectives. In the context of intergenerational mediation, power is often embedded within the patterns of dominance and submission among the disputing parties and in the behaviors that characterize their interactions. The ethical implications of intergenerational mediation in relation to power imbalances are significant as they directly impact the fairness and effectiveness of the mediation process. Continuing that paragraph, since power dynamics are often deeply ingrained in families, failing to address these imbalances may unintentionally reinforce existing inequalities. Intergenerational mediators have an ethical responsibility to prioritize the best interest and safety of older adult clients and thus to identify and be cognizant of power dynamics. The role of the mediator is not to eliminate family relationships, but to manage power imbalances in a way that ensures fair and meaningful participation. So, again, going back to the issue with different cultures, what if these power dynamics are seen as completely necessary and healthy in a different culture, but it's interfering with everyone being able to say their piece and support this older person and their caregiver in a healthy way? So, do we have a conflict here? Several authors emphasize that intergenerational mediators must have knowledge and awareness of power dynamics within families. If a mediator does not have a solid understanding of family circumstances or is not cognizant of power dynamics, particularly in situations where an older person is dependent on the other parties, these power differentials can be consciously or unconsciously perpetrated by the mediator. Several authors highlighted a range of strategies that mediators can use to identify and manage such power imbalances. Final paragraph. One strategy is to liaise with the older adult prior to the mediation process. The mediator can inquire about how the older adult would like to be represented and supported, as well as obtain as much context and knowledge about the family dynamics as possible. Some additional strategies include assessing the intentions of parties during pre-mediation and mediation, and relying heavily on body language and physical cues during the mediation process. So I just want to touch on that last bit. So I have not been a mediator. I've taken tons of training, but it's not my kind of work. So what I'm talking about is from an academic point of view, but also touching a little bit about body language in other areas outside of mediation. And it does disturb me a little when they're talking about relying heavily on body language. So sure, if someone is being overtly aggressive and pounding on the table or whatever, you might have an unhealthy dynamic happening there. But other kinds of body language can be very cultural specific. Also, are people getting bad ideas from other content? What am I talking about? I know this sounds trivial, but Criminal Minds was a show I used to watch a lot, and they would talk about what the body language of the people being questioned means. And I got to tell you, between my handwriting and the way I stand and the way I move, they'd totally write me off as a serial killer. So I do find it a bit concerning, this kind of emphasis, especially when we've just been talking about how cultures can be so different. So, what do you think? Is it wise to kind of rely more on body language than text, or do you think they're just recommending, you know, combine different kinds of observation and that's totally okay? Anyways, so this is my bit about elder mediation. If you got to the end of this video, thank you for getting to the end of this video. If you enjoy this content, it would be great if you clicked like and subscribe, and have a great day.